Let's get it started.
Double O.
Think like a rapper.
This is Double O, and you are tuned in to Think Like a Rapper, episode 116. And today I have another OG, another legend. She is considered the queen of sample clearances. She's worked with everybody from Eminem to Drake to Kendrick, DJ Khaled, Mary J. Blige, anybody and everybody. She runs DMG Clearances, and if you don't know her work behind the scenes, you definitely know some of the movies, 8 Mile, The Defiant Ones, Hamilton. She is Deborah Mannis-Gardner. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.
Oh, no, definitely. I wish I would have had you very early on in my career navigating sample clearances because, I found myself in hilarious situations trying to get things clear. But I want to start there. I want to start with a primer for those people who may or may not really understand the way in which samples are cleared. A lot of young producers, a lot of young artists always come to me with these sort of questions of like, I'm going to sell one copy and I sampled this, I sampled Prince on this song. Do you think I should get it cleared or what have you? So for Sampling Clearance 101, I am a young artist. I just made a song in my bedroom where I sampled Barry White, let's say. And I want to put the song out. If I were to do it the proper way, how would I go about it? What are the sort of, what's involved in clearing a sample?
Weirdly enough, I know Barry White stuff off the top of my head. So most of his publishing is Savette Warner Chappell, and most of his masters are through Universal label. So if you were to do it the right way, you should hire someone to do the clearance for you. Because what we do is we actually confirm who the rights holders are. We confirm who the writers are. Sometimes Barry wrote alone. Sometimes he had co-writers, but most of his stuff is through Warner Chappell as the administrator. So we would then put together a letter of request that we would send over to Warner Chappell with a copy of the new song and a description of the sample, and we would negotiate a fee on your behalf. Most publishers ask for a non-recoupable fee. That fee can range between $1,500 to $2,500, and then they'll ask to own a piece of the new copyright. On the master side, again, I happen to know Barry White and Love Unlimited Orchestra. It was mostly Polydor Universal. We would do the same thing. We would reach out to the label. We would send a formal letter of request, and we would negotiate a deal. They would Standard would ask for a recoupable advance against a percentage of PPD, and then also usually a percentage of third-party licensing artist net receipts. If you're just starting out and you don't have the money to clear a Barry White sample, I usually suggest to people to go to either TrackLib that has pre-existing copyrights. They don't have Barry White, but they've got some pretty amazing stuff. Or if you're just looking for beats, I recommend for people to go to Splice and to sample pre-cleared beats without any issues. So, your first obstacle of clearances is availability, and your second is cost.
So there's so many threads to pull in there, but let's start at the beginning. So when a song gets submitted for a sample clearance, and just use myself for instance, I worked on the title track of a Freeway song when he was on Def Jam, and they wanted 50% of the publishing on the song, and they wanted, I want to say $30,000 or something like that up front. So you were talking about fees anywhere in between,
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, the publishers were all over the place, but those were recoupable fees, but they would be between $2,500 to $30,000.
Yeah.
It's really changed because those were like mechanical advances and they were recoupable. Not too many hard configurations are released. So it's hard to recoup against these streaming or these downloads. So that's why the publishers have turned it into this lower non-recoupable rate. As for the percentage, those are usually based on how extensive the use is. And it's my job to go back and forth with people to discuss what we think that percentage should be.
This is often, this weird battle happens in that, and especially with young artists and young producers, where if a producer samples a record, artist, let's say, has the deal, he's going to be the one putting it out. They often feel that they shouldn't be the ones losing their publishing and that should come out of the producer side. Do you advise on, and what would you advise in terms of how to split publishing when you have a sample in it that is, you're going to lose some publishing on?
I always believe it should come off the top. When you hire a producer and you know that producer samples, then you know in advance that a piece of the publishing is going to be taken for the sample. Mm-hmm. Again, we go back to the 90s, you know, when LL Cool J did 14 Shots to the Dome, and Marley Marl was one of the producers, and I think Supercat was the other one on the West Coast. And and LL's deal was, I get 70, you get 30, and the sample comes out of your share. And so these producers of the 90s weren't seeing much publishing at all. It's really changed in, you know, like when I work with Marshall or I work with Drake, they are like the most honest, amazing artists where they know the producer's going to sample, it comes off the top. They work out these splits in advance. So if you're doing something new, as a producer, that's the first thing you should be saying is, hey, you've hired me as a producer, you know, I sample. There's going to be, you know, a piece of that publishing is going to have to go for the sample, and the balance should be split between us. Because the sample is what makes the song a lot of times.
And you chose it.
And you chose it and you like it. So I think everyone should eat.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's often this, and I've found this, and this is a much larger sort of conversation, but there's sometimes this misconception, I think, by artists that everybody else around them, even though they may consider themselves artists, are in the service industry. So there's often this, whether it be producers or graphic designers or, music video directors. And there's this kind of like, this weird relationship can be built where artists feel like all these other people work for them, basically, instead of it being an equal exchange of ideas.
I always say it's a team effort, you know, especially if your music, you know, when you bring in producers, you know, we have to think about how things have changed so much. You know, back in the day with the Beatles, the producer of the Beatles song did not get any publishing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's you know, as everything evolves and changes, and it was really this genre of music that kind of opened it up for the producers to get a piece of publishing. People don't give this genre of music credit, but let's think about what rock producers got publishing in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And even
they were just paid up front, right?
Right. If you think about it, or they were paid a royalty, but they didn't get a piece of the publishing. So I'd like to think, in my opinion, that it was this genre of music that opened that door to give producers publishing.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit. There was something this was a long time ago, but it's always a case that gets talked about, which is sort of the battle between Lauryn Hill and the producers on The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. In that there was just a lot of this confusion. She essentially gets named as the producer of the project, even though there are all these sort of hands in it. And then there's this battle of publishing and mechanical royalties. And it actually, I guess it kind of just happened recently with Frank Ocean and Blonde as well, where the album was rushed so fast to come out that there were no credits and there was nothing negotiated prior to its release. Just so that I think young artists know this, and so sometimes I know this as well, there's no legal ease that says that a person has to get written credit on something they're in, right? That is a courtesy almost.
It's a
Correct me if I'm
courtesy. I
wrong.
mean, it's almost like a mantra that I have, like inadvertent failure, not a breach. I used to say
Okay.
that all the time. But like when I was in the studios with Will Power,
Mhm.
um, he did all the Yellow Wolf stuff. I actually helped him create songwriter sheets and producer sheets to have in the studio. So if someone came in and played a guitar lick, they actually wrote it down and determined what if he was told what to play, he was a work for hire. If he created some of the stuff on his own, then he wrote it down and they would say he got 5% or 2% or whatever that percent is. So that's the first thing I try to teach people is whenever you're in the studio with someone, is to have this. Now, obviously things are changing because we're in the land of COVID where everyone's creating stuff in their own studios and you're sending the stems to each person to do their own thing. You can send that piece of paper along with it. So even if you don't have a lawyer documenting something as things are occurring, there's no reason why you guys can't be doing it through email correspondence, saving text correspondence, or doing, a split document that anytime you work on something, you say, I did this and this is my share. And if a
Yeah.
sample added, it comes off of that.
And it should
So
be probably done on the front end earlier, sooner than later when people have
it's
forgotten
rarely,
days later.
yeah, rarely, there's this amazing woman by the name of Francesca Spiro, God bless her, who has since passed away. She was at a Bad Boys camp. She was the manager. She managed Marley back in the day before Bad Boy. She was there for Puff, handling all of those during the heyday of
Mhm.
all the producers. She would sit there and count the number of words each rapper sang on a song to come up with splits. So that when
Wow.
we had all those songs with all those different writers, all those different verses, she sat down, counted out every word that they did, and came up with splits, and then submitted it to them for consideration.
That's amazing. And for, if you're a brand fresh new producer, you get brought into a situation, and let's say they're paying you a day rate as well, but you're still creating all the things yourself. Should you be pushing for publishing on that record, or should you be looking at, like, where does the line or the gray area sort of tilt more towards, go from work for hire to actual, someone who owns a piece of copyright or publishing?
Being creative, if you're
Mhm.
being creative and you're adding something to it, you should ask for a piece. You might have been hired as a work for hire just to do your job, but then you do something creative, you should say, hey, I just did X, Y, and Z, and can I get 3% or 5% or whatever percent you come up with?
And this is something that is again unique to hip hop, right? Because if you were in James Brown's band back in the day, nobody got publishing except for, James and the
He
and the
gave some
label.
writing credit to some of the guys,
Okay.
but he was a control freak.
Yeah.
He told everyone, this is how you play your notes. This is what I want to hear. So with James Brown, he really dictated what they needed to do. He really was the hardest working man because he told everyone what it's had to sound like. Play these notes, play it like this, play it like that. He had it all created in his head.
Yeah.
And then there are some songs that have a third party other writers.
Okay. Yeah. No, I know that there's always not beef, but because Clyde Stubblefield sometimes is considered almost, his breaks are like the backbone of a lot of hip hop records, especially 90s records and 80s records, to know that he wasn't really getting publishing off of any of that stuff because it was a go in and play what James wants to, play sort of thing. And I see it happening a lot now with everyone looks at the back of, or not the back because there's no back of CDs anymore, but everyone's looking in the credits and they'll see on a Kanye project or on a Travis Scott project or Beyonce or Rihanna, 10, 15 people involved in just making one song, even if there are no samples involved anymore. And there's a lot of confusion as to, well, who's doing what? How is this happening? If I'm in this situation, what am I, where does my contribution begin and end? I know that there's been for a while with Kanye, at least what I remember when I was over there speaking with Che Pope, is that essentially if you're in the room and you're a part of the energy that helps create that record, it's really hard to say if you took out this component or this component or this component that the record wouldn't be what it is. And so it's much better to give credit essentially to, even if it's really small fractional pieces, everybody that was there at the time, because
Kanye did that.
Yeah.
I was clearing some Kanye songs for Black AF on Netflix, and like there was this one guy that had like 1.25%. He was the engineer, and Kanye gave him a piece of the publishing. So and Tupac used to do that also. He would help friends out that were on the floor during a recording, and they'd have like 2%. So, but that was what people used to do, and I think people still do it once in a while.
Yeah, I think it's so much more important to have, like you said, to understand that the team, however you organize it, that helps put things together, whichever way they did or didn't, what they've started, what they ended, it's just way better as an artist, especially starting out, to just to make sure that everybody is properly compensated in that space, so that they're not, you're not dealing with a bunch of egos or people who then feel like they don't want to clear a record because they didn't get enough, or, all these weird publishing beefs that happen simply because they're not being properly compensated. Right. To move on a little bit, how has streaming changed the way that you had mentioned before, that these large amounts, I remember being around for something where I want to say that to clear a record, Barry White's estate wanted 60% of the record and points on the album that it was on. And so it ended up having to go through a replay but has that stuff changed? Is that pretty much dead now because we're going straight to streaming and the numbers are so fractional that it doesn't even really matter? Or they're
still asking, Barry White would probably come in at like a $10,000 advance recoupable against 8% of PPD.
Okay, so that
8% is a solid 8% when it's a single, but if it was an album track and an whole album gets downloaded, that gets prorated by the number of tracks. But I mean, the artist contracts are changing also, so you're having to recalculate and figure all this stuff out, and we're still trying to figure this out. We're still trying to guess, what does this mean? What is this value? But if you don't know what X is, it's hard to determine what Y is. And we're still unclear of the different values of X, because streaming on Spotify might have one value and Tidal is a different value. Rhapsody is another value. Do you see what I mean? So, and Apple's another value. So X is a variable, and it's a problem. It's a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is not specifically in your wheelhouse, but I really wanted to talk to you about this. There's a lot of back and forth happening with social media sites, Instagram, Facebook, Twitch, Mixcloud, and these copyright or DMCA takedowns by rights holders, whether it be for playing music while you are playing a video game in the background, or DJs, or anybody that's trying to be really creative in this streaming time. Is that the same case, that we're in this brand new territory where rights and copyright was thought of something that was a physical thing? When someone said they owned the masters back in the day, it's because they actually had masters locked away somewhere, for whatever duration of time that is. But that doesn't exist anymore. Everything is just in this digital ether. And so, what are your thoughts on how the industry reacts, and maybe if you had the reins, how you would potentially negotiate rights so that it could move a little freer, so that things didn't have to be, you didn't have to have a takedown notice if you were simply trying to DJ and support an artist that you really enjoy.
I think we need to come up with better fees. I think the problem is when you've got these DJ sets and you go to the labels to clear it, their fees can range from $250 to $1,000, and $1,000 a song for a DJ set, and you're doing like 20 or 30 songs. That's just on the master side. It gets astronomical. I'd like to think that we could come to terms, and we can't rely on a government regulation that is so antiquated that doesn't really make sense on what these values are. I think our government's a mess, so I don't right now. So hopefully in 2021, when hopefully we have a new government in place, that the people who are actually working with Congress, working with the Senate, working with government officials to regulate and to come up with fees that will work. If we had an explanation of the variable why, like we just referred to, then I don't think it would be that difficult to do. You know, we don't have set fees on anything in the States except for what a mechanical rate is. Everything else is arbitrary. When you go to clear something for television or for streaming or for a podcast, there's no rate card.
Yeah.
There's no rate card. They used to try to do that in England. And I got to tell you, clearing music in the UK is so much less expensive and easier and faster. And I can't explain why. Because we happen to have some clients. We do some clearances for BBC and for Netflix UK. So our antitrust laws prevent us from coming up with necessarily rate cards, but there should be a standardized idea of what fees should be for different types of uses.
Yeah, I've always felt that there needs to be something that is, whether it be a flat rate or something that is just negotiated before and agreed upon within the major label system or the music industry in general, before it leaves it. Because as soon as it does, that's where the confusion happens, you know, whether it's a download on iTunes or it's a stream on Spotify. Once it gets there, no one knows what to do once it's happened. And again, we're dealing in these places now, like you mentioned, podcasts, where you're like, okay, so what is it worth there if none of these people are or even making money off of it? You know, if you're playing video games.
That's a great point. With the podcasts, you know, some people claim podcasts are making boatloads of money, and some people are saying podcasts are making zero money. And it's difficult to get podcasts that are music-based. I mean, the only one who really did was the Comeback Jack show, but he used fair use and he came to me initially. And after long conversations, he and his attorney decided he was going to do fair use because he was discussing each of the songs. I don't do fair use, so I can't express whether I agree or disagree with what he did. But I don't think any of his stuff could probably continue being out there. I don't know if you can even have access to his podcast anymore. I mean, he was absolutely amazing. But with podcasts, you don't hear a lot of music-based podcasts. And I'd like to see that change. You know, maybe if there's advertising revenue, that the publishers and labels could get a piece of that advertising revenue if it is making a lot of money. Again, this is like so in the air. And sorry I cut you off. You were about to ask about video games as well.
Oh, I'll get there. Don't worry.
Okay.
I have my own beef with them as well.
Well, video games, you know, I clear all of Rockstar video games. And so those are not considered music-based games. So those are flat fees. Games that are music-based, music-driven, those are usually done with as a royalty.
So, okay, because I've never actually I've had music in non-music-based games. You know, what have I had it in? Any Madden, a bunch of driving games, GTA, things like that. And I always looked at this issue where there is the upfront, there's the flat fee, but this video game will go on to make billions of dollars, and the song will be played hundreds of thousands of times, you know, however many users there are and however much it's programmed in, but there are no residual payments on there. And I always thought that that was a weird thing, especially for an industry that does extremely well.
Well, I mean, I can argue that on so many different levels. I can argue both sides of it. My clients are not equipped. I mean, when you've got a game with like 300 or 400 songs, and so that could mean up to 800 copyright holders. I mean, it is lengthy enough to get each one of them paid. But if you, the idea of it to even put into a royalty system would be astronomical. But on the flip side, I can say that most of the songs that are in the games that I work on, it generates other revenue because it brings it to a lot of people's attention that might not have heard the song. So, you know, the games I work on, it's not like we're going for a Lady Gaga or a James Brown. I mean, GTA 5 we used, not GTA 5, San Andreas we used James Brown, but you wouldn't be using James Brown or the Isleys or, you know, stuff that is just so common. You know, I find at least my clients use really a lot of hidden gems, a lot of stuff that people would have never known about. And I think, you know, we used to do soundtrack albums. Like, again, when we did San Andreas, we did the box set. But now they create playlists on Spotify or Amazon. And my clients don't see the revenue. 100% of that revenue goes to the labels and the publishers and the writers and the artists. So it kind of, it does, in essence, create other revenue that they don't touch. They have nothing to do with.
How did you get into all of this? How do you find yourself here? What is your sort of foray? What's your first memory of hip hop, I guess, that you remember, where it's this thing where you're like, huh, I like that.
Well, I was in New York City, punk rock chick. You know, lived in Lafayette between Grand and Broome. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, goth punk, colored my hair black, whited my skin out, you know, like had that really, you know, they call them emo now, but we called it goth back then. And I heard rap, and I was like, this is my type of music, because it was very rebellious, in my opinion. It was fuck you music. And that's what punk was. It was, you know, and that was my whole attitude. Don't ever tell me how to dress. Don't ever tell me how I should look. Don't tell me how I should talk. You know, I went against everything that they told us to do. Mm-hmm. You know, back in the 80s when I was in college and high school, and then in the 90s. And so there were no rules for clearing samples. And so I was working for a company called Diamond Time, and I said, I want to do this. I want to get involved. If you're teaching me to do clearances for film and TV, and this is copyright that's being incorporated, I want to do this. And so I got involved in the 90s, you know, clearing Shinehead. I was working with Eric Sermon and Parrish Smith, who I'm still tight with, you know, working on Reggie Noble's first album, working with Redman, working with Wu-Tang Clan, working with, you know, Busta. Busta and I still talk on the phone. And he's like, you know me when I was skinny, when I was big, and now you know me, you know. We go way back, you know? So I related to that stuff very much so, because I really believed in doing what you weren't supposed to do and saying what you weren't supposed to say. And I always felt that's what that movement was about. And from that led me into doing television and film and video games, because everyone else was scared of hip hop and rap. They were scared of samples. They were scared of a song that had 15 writers and 11 publishers. So, and I wasn't. It just meant, you know, extra work, I guess. So that kind of led me into doing that. But then being educated, always reading up on things, following what technology was, I always tried to keep on top of all of that stuff, from podcasts to streaming to, you know, digital platforms. And every time it changes, I always want to be part of it to make sure that music's cleared. I attend conferences. I go to panels. I discuss things. I'm the one that says, I don't believe in organic. I don't believe anything should be free. You know, you know, I went to CES, which was that big conference in Vegas, you know, with the new technology. And every panel I went to was like, oh, it should be organic. You know, the music is organic. No. Music is part of our everyday life. And if you want to keep having music in your life, then you need to pay for it. You need to make sure that the artists and the writers are compensated so they can keep making music. And so that's kind of how I got involved and stayed involved.
Expound on that a little bit, because I do think there is this, there's always this weird conversation that happens, especially when you're an up and coming artist, that you're supposed to be doing or giving away the music for free and doing all this stuff for no compensation except the insane amount of time. Because at some point down the line, there is this sort of pie in the sky compensation. Do you think that still holds true, should hold true? Or like you said, kind of from day one, there should be a way in which compensation should occur?
I think compensation should always occur. I've offered my services for free maybe a few times since 1990. You get what you pay for. I always tell people I won't ever send out a letter of request asking for gratis consent. Mm-hmm. If you want to hire me to do clearances and you're willing to pay me, then you have to be willing to pay for the music. I don't do anything for free. I won't ask for anything for free. So then you get these kids that are like, oh, I sampled this song, but I'm not selling it. It's going to be up there for free so that I can I can break myself into the industry. If you've got a sample in it, that sample supplements or has a value, because it's going to break you in, and so therefore they should be paid or compensated. So that's why I say nothing should be free. Even if it's $1.99 for a download, you need to pay for it. And again, everyone always hears me say this: if you're willing to pay for a bottle of water, if you're willing to pay for a cup of coffee instead of making it at home, then you need to be willing to pay for music.
Yeah, no, I think that I mean, I believe it 100%. I see so many issues happening now with streaming and the blockbusters, the people you work with. No one's complaining up at that height because they're obviously getting paid insane amounts of money. But if you're getting 1,000 streams, if you're getting 50,000 streams, if you're getting even 1 million streams, the money in comparison is so much lower that if there is a sample involved in it, if there are a bunch of publishers involved, it becomes. I spoke with somebody once who said they were a part of they were co-writer on a song. I think it had like 150 million plays or something like that, and they saw like $4,500 out of that, their percentage.
That's why we need to have the laws change. That's why I think that there's going to be a lot of activity in 2021. I thought the activity was going to be in 2020. We didn't expect to have a pandemic. And then with what's going on now, I think we all are putting our family and friends first before we can put our energy on changing the laws with regards to music. I think we have other laws that are more important right now. But I think in 2021, I think there's going to be changes.
What would you change? What would be the things in ways to make sure that the rights or the creators just get compensated better?
I think there's got to be a better trickle flow of revenue. It seems to be all stuck at that top with the labels. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see more money getting over to the publishers and to the writers and to the artists. I think it's just, we always talk about the 1% when we're talking about the wealth of America. I think it's also the 1% that are making the money in the music industry. And I think there needs to be a change so that the artists are seeing money. I read a fabulous article in Rolling Stone magazine. I'm sure you just saw it this week, where we're dealing with the Black Lives Matter situation, where the major labels have contributed a lot of money towards the cause. But the next step and the next question becomes, what about reevaluating artist contracts where they're not seeing the revenue? And, maybe it made sense back then, because when you released an album in the 50s and 60s and 70s, it had that one time of life. Then CDs came about, and so as things are, and then samples and this, that, and the other. So why can't we change it so that those artists that really made these labels what they are financially get compensated appropriately and similar to what the artists now make.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been confusing to me that the music industry is maybe the only industry that doesn't operate the way that other businesses do. In other words, if you were a startup and went to a VC for investment and for guidance, your deal would just be so much better than kind of what happens with music artists and the label. And it feels like it needs to catch up at this point to that, because even recoup, I'll always say I feel like recouping is inherently a bad idea and kind of has always been that, if you invest in an artist, yes, you should 100% be getting your investment back off the top, instead of it simply coming from, the badly negotiated small percentage that the artist has been given.
It's yeah, we're in a weird industry. When my dad retired, he worked for DuPont. He was a chemist and a salesman, and then he came to just do work for me, handling my invoicing and stuff. And I said to him, music industry is very different. Imagine buying a house and all of a sudden the neighborhood's value has changed. So you're going to renegotiate the purchase of that house. Unheard of. But in the music industry, it's common.
Yeah.
What does a contract mean in the music industry? It means something you can always renegotiate. So there's an upside and there's a downside to that. So we live in a world that is just different than anything else in society.
Yeah, and I think it needs to, as artists gain more power as the tools. I think it was a walled garden before. The idea of someone in the 50s pressing up 7 inches at scale and getting them around the country and doing all this stuff it just didn't seem feasible. When you talk about someone like Busta Rhymes, right? His music videos cost millions of dollars. Those same videos now can get done with a green screen and a, $1,500 camera to an extent. And another kid that's really good at graphics in India could be doing sort of all this stuff on there. And so it's changed what the value of major labels especially sort of bring to the table, other than, large amounts of money and this sort of network of, this good old boy network as it relates to, getting your music out there. But one of the new things that's popped up that I do want to talk about, because it's been very interesting from a producer side for me, are sites like TrackLib, sites like Splice, a lot of these sample pack sites like Ill Minds, Blap Kits, that then become everyone's essentially, you have a whole slew of new producers now making their own samples and then getting co-production credit or getting on major albums because another producer has bought their pack for $20 and then put that record on there. How has that changed for you, your business now, where you have all of these digital products that are just floating and flying around? And why isn't there more stuff why aren't there more sites like TrackLib? Why aren't there more catalogs that are willing to?
I'm involved with helping TrackLib. I work with them directly. I've given guidance to Splice. So it hasn't affected me as a business. But, I think there's a lot of obstacles for TrackLib to get these pre-cleared songs in the system, to get these copyright holders to agree to it. And for Splice in the beginning, there were people who were giving them stuff to upload that they didn't have the rights to. So there's other smaller companies the labels are kind of avoiding because they've gotten some lawsuits because they were selling beats where that person who sold the beat didn't have the right to grant those rights. They had samples in them. So
Yeah.
We're very wary of that stuff in those libraries. I I think the problem is sometimes people don't realize that when they created a beat, it even has a sample in it when they've uploaded it. You know, there's that young generation that doesn't really understand that kind of stuff, or they think if they took a snare hit, they didn't have to clear it. I think also when you offer a beat for $25 or $20 on some of these sites, and you've got 15 people using it, and then you Shazam them, the one song will overrule the other songs for identifying it.
Yeah.
You know, so I think if you want originality, just be careful in what you use and make sure that you alter it.
Yeah,
I'd like to see more sites that do it, but it hasn't happened yet.
And for young artists, that I think that is a rumor to dispel. It doesn't matter. Especially the problem now is that I could go on Reddit and I could look for a drum kit, and I could just download it and think, oh, okay, this other person posted this, I should be fine, not realizing that they chopped that up from impeach the president drums or something like that.
Oh my God, I was thinking that exact same song. That's funny.
And so there's an impeach the president snare on something that you downloaded for free. You don't realize it. You use it in a record. It then goes out, and then all of a sudden you have this huge lawsuit on your hands. Is there a way to navigate that for producers or even artists in general?
If you want to impeach the president, you go into TrackLib because it's there.
Okay. Oh, that's amazing. That's a good thing to know.
That's on TrackLib. So, you know what? If you hear something, sometimes you can Shazam it. You have people listen to it. You know, there's some great sites where people do sample identification. You know, they just get beats and they sit there and they have these, I guess it's some private groups that belong to Facebook where these people post a beat and then everyone tries to guess where it came from, you know, guess that uncleared sample.
It's hard though, because I've personally had to send some emails out to who sampled, for instance, because they identified a track that I had done as a sample drum break, but it was actually something that was stock inside the production software that I used, you know, and those things were royalty free. So you do get these weird, it's weird now, especially with the replays that GarageBand or Reason, which is what I was using in Ableton, they know that there are these famous breaks, so they try to make versions of them that are usable, but yeah, you could still get caught up in something like that.
You can, and I have approached who sampled saying, this is wrong information, please pull it down. You know, I was the clearance agent, this is my client, this is inaccurate information.
Oh.
So I have done that.
What are your thoughts on them? Are they the feds? Because it's a great...
Some of it's relevant, but the problem I've had, and I've done other work, is there might have been a sample in a song from the 90s, but we might have done a buyout deal back then because we used to do all media buyouts. You know, Me Fi Me had the James Brown sample that I did as a $500 buyout, all media worldwide perpetuity. So when they listed on there, sometimes, you know, you've got 3 generations later of people working at these companies and like, this is an uncleared sample, or we didn't get accounted to. And I'm like, because it was a buyout. And I'm one of the few people left that knows these deals and has to point this out to them.
Yeah, no, time has been very interesting, I think, also. I mean, in general, in society, but especially as it relates to this, is how quickly we also forget those things, right? Like, you're having what we used to do, what my group kids in the hall used to do, which I thought was sort of interesting. Our workaround for some of our biggest records was, at a time we were using acapellas from older 90s records, and then we would essentially track down the artist and get them to redo it, because often they weren't being compensated for the original record because they had got caught in some sample clearance. And so it was a way in which we could give back, make sure that they got a good amount of publishing, but then also include something that people knew in the in the new record. What do you so you're hopeful for 2021 that there's going to be this massive sea change in terms of copyrights and the way in which we negotiate these?
I hope so. I hope it takes the technology and we get these fees in place. 2020 is a wash. So
But do you think that from the fan perspective, from the fan, we can turn off the DMG clearances for a second. Do you think that 2020 will produce some of the music that you fell in love with, some of the that aggression that needed to be inserted back into the lives, I guess, of the creators?
I think musically,
Yeah.
2020 is going to be a fabulous year for new music. I think with what's going on, I said this during the pandemic that we were going to get great music. Now, with the change of social injustice being hopefully changed,
Yeah.
I just got a new song this morning where a client took a cover version and changed the lyrics, and we were asking permission, but to make it relevant to what is happening right now, and hopefully for a Wednesday release. So I think what's happening is going to affect all of us on a personal level and then on a music level. I know it's going to affect our children. I have a 19-year-old. My son is biracial, and we sit down and we have conversations about this stuff every day. Every day of our lives, we discuss this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I am. When the pandemic started, I saw streaming numbers going down. I was hopeful that there would be this resetting, because if you're not in the club, then there's no reason to sort of make club music, and there wasn't really a place for it. So then what do you make? And so, with having a little bit of time, it was like, oh, okay, these people can hopefully sit with their music and make something that's more meaningful. And now there's all this meaning that can be, hopefully pulled from and inserted into the records to make something a little bit more worthwhile. Because I do feel like, even though there's some great artists that are talking about it, a lot of people have chosen escapism as a way to deal with it than actually sort of facing the problem. So I'm interested to see what happens.
I am too. I mean, because if you think about the music that was done in the 60s, if you think about what Sam Cooke did, if you think about what artists did to reflect what was going on, and I think we're going to see the same again, but I think we're going to see it cross different genre of music, because I think what's going on right now is not just for one community.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't want to keep you too long, but I did want to ask, what's been the hardest sample to clear?
There's a lot of hard stuff.
Really?
I mean, Led Zeppelin is difficult, and I did clear Led Zeppelin not for sampling, but in School of Rock, and that alone was really difficult for synchronization purposes. When it comes to sampling, people have to take into account, number one is availability, and the second is cost. And there are some artists and there are some writers that just do not want to be sampled. And it's not that they feel emotional towards that genre of music. It's just them as artists creatively, they created their music in such a way that they don't want it altered or changed because they like the way it is. Mm-hmm. Outside the United States, writers have the rights to deny cover versions. In the United States, you can't decline. Once something's commercially released, anyone can do a cover version and just ask for a compulsory license. Outside the United States, a writer has the right to deny a cover.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Yeah, I've spoken to a bunch of old Brill building guys and a bunch of older songwriters and producers, and yeah, some of them are just like, no, I made it this way, this is the way it is, I don't need it altered or anything.
And you have to respect that,
of course,
as long as they don't bend on it for financial compensation. If you think about it, even when people are creating music and they put a sample in and they want that sample and you can't tell them to pull the sample out, creatively they chose that sample for a reason. So go back to the artist that created the initial song, and theirs is the same way. You have to respect everyone's decision on stuff. There's never a reason why you can't ask why. I mean, I'm working on a video game right now, and I've gotten some denials, and I have to say, respectfully, can you tell me why you've denied it? Was it the offer? Was it the game? I'd like some feedback so I have a good understanding to know in the future. So the same thing applies with samples. If someone says no, there's no reason why you can't say, may I ask why, as long as you do it respectfully.
No, it's very, very good way to take it. Has there been a sample you haven't been able to find to clear?
Yes. There's like a 1%. Yeah.
So they're like, here, we don't know where it came from.
It had, they couldn't identify it. We actually identified it for them. It was released on a white label 45.
Wow.
And they found it on YouTube. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's what I love, and I think what so many producers love about sampling is it's not simply, oh, there's this thing, you made this famous record, I'm just going to chop it up and try to make it famous again or popular. It's that there is this world, these stories that they tell. They're, like you said, there can be this place where you can find, I remember talking to Egon from Stone's Throw, and he had dug and found these multi-track tapes from like a high school band in Texas that had done interpolations of Motown records or something like that, and then has now this access to be able to sort of sample and use them. And there are these amazing stories. Sesame Street doing Isaac Hayes interpolations that then, there's just these ways in which music is continuing this connected lineage from genre to genre and from generation to generation, that can always be seen and felt and heard through sampling. So many people I know grew up on hip hop records, but now listen to essentially mostly the samples that they found in them, because that was their entry point and their discovery into, all these old things. I wanted to leave you with one last question though. What have you learned from hip hop that you use in your everyday life?
What have I learned from hip hop? Mm-hmm. On a business sense or on a
everything
sense?
Anything. It could be as a mom, it could be as a business owner, just anything that from the culture, not simply just the music.
Okay, so here's the thing, hip hop was considered like the bastard child of music. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought of myself as like that bastard child of everything. I again, kind of goes back to what I said, like I never really fit into anything. Like I never thought I'd get married. I thought I'd have children with an au pair. I always they always thought like these really weird thoughts of what my life was going to be. And so I think where I kind of related to the hip hop and rap and how it's affected my life is it was kind of like standing up, standing out. When you were the underdog, I don't know how many artists I've come to their defense. I'm very protective of my clients. And, everyone always just assumed my son being, growing up in a world in my home of hip hop and rap and that genre of music, would only be listening to hip hop and rap. And in actuality, my son listens to whatever makes him happy. Yes. He uses YouTube to find new music. His favorite band is the Gorillaz, which is
amazing.
Which I think really represents him, because Gorillaz are really made up of all genre of music that mm-hmm. comes together. And that brings my son the most joy is the Gorillaz. And so music has always been part of our lives. I was a single mom. My son's father passed away at a young age, and music has always just been part of who we are and what we do. And his father was a hippie. My son's father was a hippie. So, and we forgave him.
Can never predict life. That is one thing for sure, right?
No, he was a Grateful Dead head. So, in this house, which is filled with instruments and music, all of us listen to different stuff. And that's really, if you think about the culture of hip hop, it is made up of all these different elements to create something new. And that's what my house is.
Perfect. Awesome. That's the best note to end it on. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have to get back to